Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I'm Not Gonna Be Quiet. Thank you for clicking on the link and joining me. Again, this is always so special when you take the time out of your busy schedule and, sit with me for a good 45 minutes and just be in community with me. So let's get free together. Today, my guest is Naima Warts. She is a Black woman whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. Naima has been living with a brain disorder for 24 years. Welcome, Naima.
Welcome. I'm glad to be welcomed.
You are. I feel like, when I talk, I kind of have this singer actor in my head, and so when certain words come out, I usually connect it with a song, and I feel like there's a welcome church song or something. I don't know what it is, but I wish I could sing it for you. But either way, I'm so happy that you agreed to join me today to talk a little bit about your journey. This is really helpful information that I think people will find useful. I think people will be able to connect with your experience.
Thank you so much, Danica. It has been a long journey for me, and I believe that initially it was very difficult for me to see purpose in all that I've experienced. And coming around full circle at this point, after having lived with this brain disorder for more than 2 decades, I'm recognizing that no pain is without purpose. And that has been just a key theme for me throughout my journey.
Yeah, that's quite the revelation, right? I think that is kind of the point of our existence. This is just my own feeling, right? We all have purpose, and we define it according to what we know. Mm-hmm. And when you discover it, it just opens up a brand new way of seeing things, of existing, of moving in the world, and developing relationships. So I'm so excited to get to learn more about your purpose. But first, before we jump into the nitty-gritty, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a woman of 46 years old, very grateful to have reached this milestone age. I think that when I was younger, I thought life would end at 21. Twice that age, I recognize that there are definitely advantages to every decade of your life, and you're gaining wisdom, and you're gaining experience, and you're gaining gray hair. So
I have some of those. I can identify.
But as for who I am and who I've become, I have lived in St. Louis my entire life, and that was only broken by a 4-year stint in Atlanta at Spelman College. And so my initial years were very countercultural, Danica. My family was one of the only ones in my neighborhood that was a 2-family home. And I know you are aware of just how influential that particular factor could be in a young woman's life. And so my family really emphasized education. Afrocentricity was huge. My parents lived in Africa before I was born, and all of my siblings and I have African names. So there was a degree to which we prized elements of our identity that in the community were not very well known, or that were viewed as negatives. For instance, the association with Africa and the knowledge of what African culture truly means. So yeah, that's a little bit of my initial story. It continues with having reached my senior year in college and experiencing this storm, this tsunami in my life of being diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. And the reason I distinguish bipolar 1 from any other form is because my brain chemistry is very evenly weighted between high highs and low lows. And what I'll kind of attempt to explain about those things is that when I was initially diagnosed, I literally had a break from reality. It was completely contrary to my normal demeanor, and people immediately knew that there was something amiss. And so I was hospitalized very quickly after those symptoms began.
Wow, that's really useful information in talking about, and you haven't said definitively what you're not going to be quiet about, but like that is a really good buildup. I appreciate the background on what your childhood experience was like, because in the 90s, this wasn't, we didn't have as many pockets of, Pan-Africanist or pro-Black, pro-African spaces like we do now. In the 90s, I can imagine what it was like to have an African name and have such a strong connection to cultural practices in Africa, and then take that to the A, and there you are at Spelman, living that out in living color. That's that's a gift. I appreciate you sharing that. So let's just jump into it, right? What have you refused to be quiet about?
I've refused to be silent about my journey as a woman living with a brain disorder.
I understand that you were diagnosed with bipolar 1 while you were at Spelman?
Yes, my senior year, when I was anticipating, all of the fanfare of graduation and just experiencing all that excitement, my brain chemistry was shifting dramatically from a normal range into a state that continued to progress until I was completely broken from reality. My experience begins with my junior year trip, a very exciting and wonderful trip to Senegal, West Africa. I spent an entire academic year there in an Islamic country, learning more about my heritage and the heritage of others. When I returned, though, Danica, I was just squeezed out like a sponge. I didn't have any energy. I was sleeping excessively, and I thought that it was just culture shock. They say that when you return from an international location to your home, you experience kind of a fish out of water feeling.
Right.
And so that's what I assumed that lethargy was. But what I didn't realize was that I was moving into my very first episode of clinical depression. And so after I returned and that summer went by, my mood began to change. That first semester, I was very, very deeply hindered from from pursuing my academic life, I remember sitting in front of a computer, Danica, and not being able to write a single sentence for an hour. And I was an English major. I'd always been able to express myself in writing, and I could kind of pop out a paper really quickly. So it was frightening to me to not have that connection any longer to my essential creativity and my writing ability. So when I went home for Christmas break of that year, I had failed every single class of my first semester of my senior year. And I didn't tell my parents until I arrived home. And so they were completely flabbergasted. I mean, I'd always been a student who took her responsibilities seriously. And so they had no explanation. I had no explanation. But when I went home, it was almost as if there was this dramatic flipping of a switch, because whereas before I had no energy, now I was effervescent. I was experiencing a lot of joy and creativity. So I was like, oh, I'm back. It was just a blip on the radar, an isolated incident. And what I didn't realize was that I was experiencing what they call hypomania, which is the preceding period before you enter into true madness or a break from reality. And so when I returned from my Christmas break, I was writing constantly. I was feeling like I was getting these revelations from everything that I was seeing. And I began to dress out of season. It was the middle of February, and I was in summer dresses and walking around campus and experiencing something called pressured speech, which, as you imagine, is, speaking so quickly that nobody can understand what you're saying, and you're moving from topic to topic, and, whereas my normal demeanor was very even-tempered, people immediately noticed that, okay, something is going on with Naima. She needs to get some help. So that's the initial onset of those manic symptoms.
So that is so fascinating to hear in that order, and to hear how many people you had touches with that were witnessing this change in conduct and behavior, and making sense of it as like, well, that's a little off. But it wasn't until you returned to Spelman that people started to sound the alarm.
Exactly, because depressive symptoms are not as noticeable. You can kind of cocoon yourself in your room, and nobody is really aware of what you're going through. But in the opposite range of bipolar disorder, when you're manic, everything is out front. Mm-hmm. It's visible, it's visceral. People can sense that your entire vibe has changed dramatically, and it was extremely painful, I think, to see that something so dramatic was going wrong, especially in this culminating year of our academic lives.
I imagine in that space there was already a detachment from reality and some distorted thinking. And so what was your response when your friends and cohort members were saying, something's off? Are you okay? What's going on?
I was at that time very embroiled in my own internal sense of rightness. And the only way that I can explain that, Danica, is that my reality seemed as real to me as their reality seemed to them.
Right.
And so I was questioning their evaluation of my behavior, because from my own internal point of view, all was well. And that is one of the most difficult aspects to break through for people that are attempting to care for people with brain disorders, is that they are attempting to fight through this wall of false reality that their loved one or their friend is going through.
Yeah, I can see that's like one of the most challenging things to treat, when you have an understanding of what is, and it's so contrary to the masses, but you're not really able to tap into that. And so I imagine there were a series of these episodes that went on over the course of several years. How long did it take for you to be able to be in a place to be treated, and to be in a place where you could hear that this is what's happening with you, right?
Okay. Well, my brain chemistry was so extreme that I was almost immediately flagged as having some type of mental instability. And so my cousin came to Spelman's campus, and she took me to a specific hospital that was equipped to diagnose and treat people with brain disorders. And she had no idea what category that might fall into. But my extremity of symptoms was actually a huge blessing, Danica, because I was immediately diagnosed, immediately treated. And many people go through their entire lives just feeling as if they're out of sync with everyone else, or being labeled strange or moody or weird. And they're not aware that there are treatments available just as effective, for instance, as insulin is for diabetes. And brain disorders are physical disorders. They can be treated with medication that is designed to equalize the balances of your brain chemistry.
Shame carries a lot of weight. It's, it really attacks the self-esteem, your self-identity. It attacks every part of who you are.
Okay.
And so how did that hurt you? How did that delay your healing? How did that impact your relationships?
Absolutely.
How did you manage it?
Absolutely. Well, the first layer of relationship that became instrumental in moving me towards healing, those were my parents and my immediate family members. They were just attempting to move forward in this huge learning curve of knowing exactly what to expect and who I would become and all of the ins and outs of that. But for my own part, I would say that there was a sense that I'd failed. Sense that, in my senior year, I anticipated that the trajectory of my life would always be upward, upward, upward. I'd had a very, very supportive childhood, very successful academic life, and to crash that way was huge. It kind of shattered my faith as well, because I felt as though I was being punished for something that I had no idea, and I had no idea what that might be. So the shame extended to my friendships. I felt so at odds with what I perceived them to be experiencing as, I always call them shooting stars. Some of them were aiming towards international business. Some were headed to different countries as advocates and as ambassadors. And so I was caught in what I call, Danica, that satanic swamp of comparisons. And it was killing.
So it sounds like you get the diagnosis, you have, a series of highs and lows and different types of treatments on and off, and then you finally find the right treatment. And it sounds like you had a collection of very sober moments. Absolutely. With a reconnection with your reality, like what transpired when you were experiencing those very low lows and the very high highs, and then how other people experienced you. How did you climb out of that?
It was really kind of a cyclical experience, Danica, because I initially thought that this would just be a one-time thing. I was naive. And I didn't realize that there would be many, many more manic and depressive episodes going forward as a result of not having the best medical regimen. And so what I didn't recognize is that it would be possible for me to regain the same sense of significance that I'd once had, but on completely different terms. And I'll explain that as such. I went to a group therapy called Procovery, and it was so revelatory to me, the premise of that particular group therapy, because they said, okay, you may not be able to go back at all and recover the things that you once thought would be the primary elements of your life, but you can take every piece of that brokenness and that pain into the future and pro-cover as you address your issues, as you speak to other people, as you come out of that cocoon of shame. You can gain ground and move forward in a direction that you could never have imagined. And that was a ladder for me up and out of those depressive symptoms. It was a ladder for me up and out of a sense of displacement. And so I really began to understand that storm in my life was not designed to derail me or to destroy me, but it strengthened me, just like the trees that are in the forest and they are being blown and tossed by the wind. Well, the little sapling is like, what in the world is going on here? But as they grow and as the winds and the rains begin to fall and whip all around them, they're gaining strength. Their roots are going more deeply into the soil. And that's the way I really felt as I began to address all of the emotional knots that I was tied in.
I really appreciate you saying that, because there's so much stigma around mental health issues, and there's so much shame attached to it, when really there's nothing that you did wrong, right? It takes a lot of work to move beyond that and understand what is separate from who you are.
Absolutely.
And your worth and value. And it sounds like you were able to do that in community with others.
I don't think that I could have procovered. I don't think that I could have gone forward without the stories and testimonies of other people who'd gone before and who had become useful and who had become peaceful about who they were and the parameters in which they now had to live. And when I say parameters, I don't mean limitations, but I simply mean the regimens that have to be a part of the lives of people who are seeking to gain ground in their lives, the medications and the physicians and the caseworkers. All of those things I call, Danica, my constellation of support. Because when my sky is dark, when I don't know how to direct myself, I can look up and see my parents, see my brothers, see my caseworker, my physician, and they can guide me forward.
Ashe, I love that for you. I love that for you. And I think just like folks were able to support you and help you and give you the map to find your way out and to recover and to heal, I think you being able to not be silent about your mental health status, your lived experience, and everything you've gained from separating yourself from the stigma of having a mental health diagnosis is going to help so many other people. And so I'm curious, as you started to develop language to define and describe what you were experiencing, and really setting a course, a new course, yes, based on your new vision and understanding of who you are, what did you, in retrospect, what did your silence cost you?
I think it costed me many years of I think that it costed me many years of solitude, because whereas before I surrounded myself with people, I was in long-term friendships. I think that there was a degree to which I felt unworthy of their affections, of their love, of their positive evaluations. And so once again, that swamp of comparison kept me from really leaning on and enjoying friendships that could have been completely life-affirming and positive for me. So that sense of isolation was a major cost when it came to the silence.
Kind of deepens and extends the trauma of these experiences when you're doing it by yourself, and all you have is the repeat of what you're coming up with in your head. That's a really lonely place to be.
It is. It was extremely lonely, and it wasn't until I began to speak to other people I found catharsis, and the ability to tell my story enabled me to understand my story to a much greater degree. And I did that through an organization called the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I was trained to speak as one of their programs called In Our Own Voice. And I began to share my story, especially with supporters of those with mental illnesses, the parents, the friends, all of the other people who formed the web that supported other people that were consumers of mental health services. And they were so encouraged by the fact that, number one, I was able to come and speak to them, that I experienced those long-term periods of equilibrium that allowed me to come to them and to be an example of not success but forward movement.
Yeah, that's so beautiful to hear, because that's the truth. That's the path to healing for all of us, right? I mean, there are other interventions, but truly the end, right? The final step is to use your voice.
Absolutely.
Right? The only way to find your voice is to use it. And so you just take one step at a time, and you say a little bit, and then the next time you say more, and then before you know it, you've said it all, and then you keep saying it.
Yes.
It's healing for you, and it's healing for those who get to stand in community with you and bear witness to your healing.
Absolutely. And everyone is struggling with something, Danica. Everyone has an area that they consider to be too dark for other people to see and accept. And so I hope that the takeaway from my story is that it's a process. You don't have to be unkind to yourself during that process. You don't have to beat yourself up, because all of the things that you're now experiencing will translate, I believe, eventually into a tremendous ministry to other people. Just as there are sponsors for people who are struggling with drugs and alcohol, you become a by proxy sponsor for other people, and you enable them to use their voices because of the freedom and liberty that you yourself have claimed. Express themselves and free other people.
I love everything that you've said. I think it's going to be so transformative for people. I appreciate you taking this time with me, Naima, and sharing what your journey has been and leaving us with some ways to start the healing process. This has been a delight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate your willingness to allow me to speak.